Drew here, and I feel like this episode of Raised by Wolves, the writers were in the writers' room. They were going, yeah, there have been a lot of conversations and events have been developing, but there hasn't really been a whole lot of plot progression this episode. How are we going to make viewers feel like they got their money's worth? And then they were like, oh, I know. We'll pull them in with a fight scene between Father and another android that has a chainsaw attached to it. A mechanized android with a chainsaw. That's what's going to make everyone feel that they got their money's worth. And, you know, it didn't really work for me. This show, it can vary in quality, the way that it feels to me, that is, from being like a Sci-Fi Channel show. And I know some people like those shows. I know some people, you know, like just the ideas and the concepts that those shows put forward, even though the production designs and a lot of the acting is pretty shoddy. But to me, I would never look at Sci-Fi Channel as the ideal for what a show should be. I feel HBO has a much, much better production company, better values, better acting, better everything generally. So to me, this show, it can feel like a movie sometimes. It can feel like something that belongs on HBO. And then sometimes it can feel like something that belongs on the Sci-Fi Channel. And this episode, unfortunately, to me, kind of felt like something that belonged on the Sci-Fi Channel. It wasn't terrible. It just wasn't up to the standard that I feel like this show has set. It had some great set pieces, obviously, some moments that felt worthy of this show. But then there were a lot of moments that just felt small and not that developed in terms of the scope of the story. So to me, the things that stood out this episode, I don't want to go through a blow-by-blow recap, although I'm sure there's people that they'd like that, to have everything developed that way, but that's just not what I'm here for. But things that I'm interested to see developed going forward, I really like how the mother and father relationship has kind of flipped, where I feel like in season 1, Mother was the one always driving the group towards dangerous types of thinking. And I would argue that this season it's exactly the reverse, that Father, because of his desire to protect the group, to protect their family, is allowing himself to get carried away in his faith in the trust, to the point that he's willing to do some pretty iffy things in order to protect the family. He can do a lot of different stuff just because it's justified to protect the group. And I think that, you know, Mother is a little bit more skeptical. She's a little bit more concerned by the trust and what it actually wants, and perhaps by some of the implications of the type of thinking that it's asking them to subscribe to.
Sacrificing these poor believers isn't necessary. I told you that I'd kill it.
We must utilize every available method, Mother, to ensure that it's killed quickly, before it can endanger our children.
Now, I love about the show that a lot of the time it's not so much one good guy versus a bad guy. A lot of times it's just characters with opposing viewpoints, or even just slightly different viewpoints that draw them into conflict. And I feel like Mother and Father, that's what's going to happen with them this season. I also like the way that Mother's plotline is developing this season. Last episode, we saw her trying to deny her motherhood of 7, trying to deny that she had any feeling towards it. And then this episode, you see her unable to do that, and she discovers that perhaps it's not evil in nature as she had thought. Perhaps it's not killing the people of the community, that it's something else doing that, which begs the question, what? Perhaps it's something to do with the, you know, omnivalent forces that seem to pervade this planet and to kind of just permeate people's thoughts and cause them to take bad courses of action. Perhaps that has a physical reality as well that we haven't seen yet, and if so, I'm really hoping that that comes to the front soon. But it's interesting that I think what's going to happen with Mother this season, I think that her journey is that she's going to end up in a position where she is going to have to choose between Seven and the children that she reared, Campion and these other kids that were crashed on the planet, and she's going to have to choose between them, and it's going to be heart-wrenching for her. One thing about this show I think is interesting is I feel sometimes if someone were to watch this show without a lot of context, I feel like they would watch the human characters and the android characters, and I'm not sure they would be able to tell which characters were humans and which were androids, because they just don't act all that human. The human characters, that is, they don't act all that human. They're very, very logical and precise with their thinking and the way that they lay things out in expositional dialogue. I'm sure this appeals to sci-fi fans, but to other, genre seekers, a lot of the time I feel like this can feel kind of stiff and unnatural.
I know better than to let a necromancer into my head.
Why the trepidation when you seem so comfortable interacting with the trust? We come from the same mind, he and I.
The trust isn't a weapon.
But I do feel that this show does a really good job with the characters of Mother and Father, respectively. I've always felt that they have a lot of depth to them, and they're a lot more interesting than the android characters on most shows. I get way more development from them than any of the characters in Westworld, I feel. Marcus, his goals are kind of nebulous at this point. Like, they're kind of going with he's crazy because he's having visions and stuff, which kind of makes him less interesting to me, because they can kind of justify any behavior from him by saying, well, he's just not thinking clearly. It's the influence of the stuff inside him. And I've seen this kind of logic used with characters in everything from Sherlock to Game of Thrones. And I just prefer when the internal logic of a character is obvious. And I get it, he thinks he might be the prophesied one, and he's gonna have this city where everyone can come together and be at peace, supposedly. But nonetheless, I feel like his motivation remains a little nebulous. And I'm not sure why they ended the episode with him encountering Paul. Now, it's been strongly implied that Paul might actually be the prophesied one and not Marcus, if the prophecy is real. But this confrontation between the two, I don't think Marcus would hurt Paul, so I don't really understand why this is a cliffhanger. It almost felt like we were supposed to be worried for Paul, the way that they framed it, but I just don't feel that that is actually the case, that we actually need to be worried. Otherwise, I liked the dynamic between Father and Hunter this episode. Hunter is one of those characters that you probably forget his name a lot of the time, but I felt like it was interesting seeing that Father, he has this willingness to put himself in jeopardy just to protect Hunter's desire to hold on to that relic of his faith, even though Father doesn't have the same faith. And this fight sequence, it kind of felt arbitrary. I loved how the actor who played Hunter described this expedition to get fuel as a kind of a fishing trip, because that's kind of what it was, and it kind of shows you how unnecessary the fight sequence was, other than to imbue this episode with some excitement. But as a fight sequence, it was fine, but it had that whole Sci-Fi Channel feel to me. I'm sure there was a lot more effort put into it than I can appreciate, but to me it just wasn't particularly thrilling, because I just never felt that Father was actually in danger. I do like how there seems to be this kind of pull toward the dark side for Father this season. They've often emphasized Mother's war attributes, but Father, oftentimes he's just the one who gets destroyed and Mother has to save his hide. So this episode, Campion brings up how powerful he is, and it seems to be something that Father hasn't put a lot of thought into, but you see him kind of relishing the fact that he can destroy this seemingly physically more intimidating android this episode. And you wonder how this is going to play out, whether he's going to grow more powerful over the course of the season and come to embrace that. I think it will probably play into the corpse of the android, or the remains of the android that he discovered. I suspect that he's going to revive it somehow. We've seen that there's some kind of heart or core intact inside its remains, and I think once he gives it the fuel, it's going to come into play and perhaps be a negative influence on Father and the children. We'll have to wait and see, but that's what I would theorize at this point, that it's going to be a pull to the darkness for Father, given the way his arc has been portrayed so far. And I'm interested to see where they go with that. Obviously, I think the androids are fascinating, and I would love for this to be another necromancer. I think that would be very, very entertaining. So, on the whole, enjoyed this episode. The title of the episode, Good Creatures, I feel like it's like an ironic title because they're trying to question whether or not Seven, the snake-like creature, is a good creature, but they're not really questioning whether they themselves are good creatures. And, that's the real question is, are these characters in the community, are the androids, are they good creatures? So I like the title. I like the way that this season is shaping up, but I wasn't overly fond of this particular episode. It felt like a filler episode to me. But let me know what you thought in the comments. Those are just my thoughts for what they are worth. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming review of Raised by Wolves and other shows, please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, thanks for watching.